many of them have read the 2017 report card.
Oh, yep.
And they've also, some have read your SDG article on systems thinking, so, and connecting.
I'm going to try to weave those things together. So number one, thanks for asking me to come.
I'm going to get your...
Yeah, I loved all my time because I did my, like Dr. Trott said, my master's and PhD at USF. And so that is like a second family to me. And I'm always happy to join a class. As far as what I do now, so this is kind of how I laid out what I was going to talk about today in my one page of notes, is who I am and what I'm doing now, and the links between what I have done and the current stuff that I'm doing, and the ways that systems thinking helps us to make those links. So I hope that this is very like dialogue based. If I say something that piques your interest or whatever, you can do whatever you want. You can raise your hand or in the little functions, or you can just like come off of mute, and I'd love to see your face. You don't have to do that. It's up to you. Yeah, but let's have it be a dialogue. Otherwise, it's just me and Maya catching up, and we could do that not recorded. So those are just kind of the things I think. Okay, so like Maya said, like Dr. Trott said, I'm working at ASCE, so American Society of Civil Engineers. My title is the Senior Manager of Infrastructure Initiatives, and so that umbrella is actually within our Government Relations Department. So that sounds a little bit weird as far as an engineering association, but we're in the Government Relations Department because the tools that we produce are used for government relations purposes. So like to lobby and to provide information to states and to the federal government and agencies and to lawmakers. But they're also public relations pieces. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So anyway, under the government relations like umbrella is our team. And so we work on the national report card. So the 2017 one is actually set to, we're almost finished with developing the content, and it's going to be published again in March. So
that would be 2021. That would be
2021 report card. And actually this year we're adding stormwater. So that's really exciting. And I was the lead author on that with the committee members. And then we do the lead staff author. Then we do state report cards. And so that's kind of my main gig. I'm the one from ASCE who's like interfacing between all of the state committees. So all 50 states have usually report card committees, and they're ASCE members in the states who are assessing infrastructure. And so that's anything from aviation to ports, wastewater, drinking water, stormwater, roads, bridges, energy sector. Anyway, I can, you've seen the links, or you can go take a look at the infrastructure report card. The exciting thing for me about being so interested in coming to ASCE, besides I'm like a huge fangirl of the national report card, was the opportunity to work with all the states and see what are some of the best practices that are happening for all of the different personalities and different functionalities of various states. So right now I'm working with Utah and Texas and Maine and Florida and Ohio and Rhode Island and Mississippi. And so while they may have very similar portfolios of infrastructure, they have similar like types of funding, like federal funding sources, things get different, much different whenever you get down to the state level. So anyway, I could go on and on about that, but I'll let you ask me specific questions. So the fact of being able to work with all 50 states is really exciting. And then the other thing is like I'm learning a lot more about all the infrastructure, that like public infrastructure for the most part, just the like a broader breadth of the portfolio. So like I didn't know a lot about the passenger facility charge that is actually capped by Congress. So it's a $4.50 charge on each leg of your flight, and that is one of the main federal sources that goes to help our public airports and things like that maintain a lot of their like breezeways and internal facilities, and then also that contributes to their pavement, like rehabilitation and stuff like that. So anyway,
stop a minute. I think somebody had a comment on the aviation and how a lot of that is paid for by who? Somebody wrote about that.
Oh.
So I was just asking who wrote in the reflection about what struck them with aviation and how it's paid for. Hello? Is everyone here? Is someone speaking?
No, I'm just kidding.
So, because someone was mentioning that they didn't realize that aviation had so much private sector funding.
Oh, yeah.
And
yep.
So I'm wondering if it's because, for example, there's a cap on what you're talking about, so they do have to look for other sources.
Yes. Adam? Bill?
Go ahead and unmute and speak, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to talk about aviation because I didn't go over that one over the UN paper, but I had a question on states and the storm sewer. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I just came into Tampa a few weeks ago, and like Pennsylvania has like a ton of like MS4s type stuff, municipal
yep.
storm sewer. Like, is that like just a Pennsylvania thing, or is that like a national?
Oh. As a matter of fact, it isn't.
Could you describe MS4 versus CSO versus?
So the MS4 is an EPA like distinction for stormwater permitting. So they're small, like universities. Adam, don't let me step on your toes if you want to talk about this.
No, go for it. All you.
Okay. So MS4s is like a permitting for stormwater. And some areas have to have stormwater permits based if they're like a small kind of, what do you call it? Like a distinct unit, maybe like a medical center or a university or something like that, and they're managing stormwater on their own. They'll have to have an MS4 like stormwater permit, and then sometimes larger areas have to have a different type of like large, I don't know what you call it. There are two phases of MS4s. Anyway, so that's stormwater permitting. But I think, Adam, one of the things maybe that you're getting at is that, especially in older East Coast states, they have a lot of CSOs, combined sewer overflows, and that's when stormwater and wastewater systems used to be coupled. And because of that, that's where there's a lot of overflow issues that a lot of federal money in the last, I don't know, probably 20 years have been going to try to reduce that as much as possible. So, yeah.
That kind of goes into the Chesapeake Bay thing too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, so Tampa, it's very similar, and it makes me want to kind of go back and look at a lot of the Tampa Bay Estuary program. You might be interested in that. So it was a big sort of watershed partnership to improve the nutrient impacts, and a lot of them were happening from point sources and non-point sources. So point sources like wastewater treatment plants and industry, and then non-point sources, which was a lot of fertilizer and stuff like that was coming off of people's yards. So this leads me to my other stuff. I think if you're okay, then let's keep moving on, and then we'll have some really good discussion about like stakeholders and stuff like that. Okay, so yes, keep the questions coming if y'all have them. That's the idea. So, like I said, the state report cards to me are like a baby step, or like a like you're zooming in on national trends and issues. So like this is the national report card. I use it every day. It's so great. But the national report card has trends, these big federal dollars and things like that, stuff that's happening sort of, if we could homogenize the country, sort of what's going on overarching. And then at the state level, it contextualizes that. So to get to Adam's point, it talks about, okay, so, federal spending for wastewater systems to decouple those from stormwater systems has been this, in the country. And then in particular, Pennsylvania needs this to get all of its systems decoupled, for all of these reasons. So the state level tools actually help engineers kind of translate their technical information and all of these wonderful insights that they already have into a usable document where they can not only talk. I encourage folks to go talk to your Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, go talk to your Rotary Club or your city council, but of course talk to your mayor, talk to your elected officials, and then certainly folks will come up to DC and they'll talk with their members of Congress. So that's kind of the breadth and depth of at least the report card tools that I work with at ASCE, not USF. And so that is like one thing that I love about this, is because it's a way for engineers to communicate well for themselves, not just to say like, you need us, we're important, or your bridges fall down, but it also illuminates the importance of things like levees. I'm from Mississippi. Levees, inland waterways, ways that we move agriculture and other manufactured products through the United States are through these inland waterways. Who would have known? The Army Corps of Engineers has big money to be operating and maintaining these things. So anyway, the other part besides the report cards, the national report card and the state report cards, the other part of stuff that I do are like economic studies and other kind of like niche topical studies. So when I was here previously, I worked on a report about asset management. So that might be something that's like super Nilla wafers, like not interesting to a lot of engineers. It's like, okay, yeah, you need to know what assets you have and how to manage them. But believe it or not, again, whenever you take that 50 state and territorial, U.S. territories approach, a lot of places don't know what they have in the ground. Again, I love the state that I'm from, Mississippi, but we don't know where a lot of water pipes are, and certainly a lot of our wastewater systems. So for operating and maintaining, that is a huge issue. Again, whenever we're considering like aspects of sea level rise or impacts from extreme events like hurricanes and things like that, to not know where your assets are is extremely important, especially whenever you have money kind of on the table to begin to spend for a recovery.
Amanda, go ahead and ask a question.
I just had a comment. I'm actually dealing with the lack of asset management now on my street. They're redoing drainage because the middle of my street just floods after it rains every time. And this project has turned, it was supposed to be like a 3-month project, and it's going on it's like 10 months now, because they keep running into old work that they didn't know was there.
Like what, water pipes or gas pipes or?
Water pipes. They had a whole new drainage system planned out, and drawings were drawn up, and then the workers came out and started to work, and they couldn't lay new pipe where it was supposed to go because it was already stuck there.
Yeah, so it's not even states that are known to be financially struggling like Mississippi, but like areas that are considered to be a lot more, either even like more progressive in the way that they manage infrastructure,
For sure.
and maybe more like fiscally savvy. I won't say everywhere else is affluent or whatever, but yeah, for sure. I mean, it's everywhere. And again, that's, yeah, I'll get to like encouraging y'all to run for local office later, but it's a real thing. Your skills would be much benefited for any city council. So
I remember last year, so they were looking at like innovative companies or technologies, and there was one talking about how do you tell if a pipe is leaking, or especially when, and so could you use sort of some type of imagery or some type of technology,
monitoring.
yeah, to sort of figure out where is wet, that might tell you where is leaking. So
yeah, totally. And those, like, so that's the great thing about like having just stepped out of academia and in the like a world that is sometimes like pragmatic to a fault, I would say, is folks won't necessarily try to give things a chance because they'll just think, oh, that's gonna be really expensive. But I think that puts impetus back on us as engineers and innovators, whether we're in the public sector, private sector, in academia, or wherever we land. I think it's to like choose things that make fiscal sense, but that are also forward thinking enough to like help us solve these real problems. So, oh yes, is there another question, or is that a hand that's raised?
It might be Adam's hand that he hadn't taken down.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so yes, those are all the things that I do. Aside from kind of the topical studies like asset management, we also have a big portfolio of all the 17 infrastructure categories that we have, and we're pushing out economic studies. So now these studies are coming out considering the economic impacts to like each household, and then also a national economic impact for failing to act. So failing to really operate and maintain infrastructure in a way that brings it up, not to pristine, everything's perfect, but up to meeting the needs of basic capacity and conditional needs. So those are the things that I do, and the exciting stuff about what I do that's new and different that I got to work on and dabble with as I was on a team with Dr. Trotz is policy. So I've learned more about policy in the last handful of months than, I mean, I know that some of it's like coming in one ear and kind of coming out the other. So that's been exciting. I get to attend congressional hearings. So we work with our engineers and brief them, and they go and testify before Congress. And so that's really exciting. So sometimes it's about stewardship of resources, so financial resources or something from recovery. Sometimes it's about, are we considering resilience in the drinking water and wastewater sector well? How do we do that better? Sometimes it's about the energy grid, all sorts of stuff. So that's kind of cool. And then I also I really like this. I work with a public relations and media relations team, and they're the ones so I work with engineers to help them make their technical content more accessible in these tools, these advocacy tools, the national report card and state report cards. But the media team works with our members to also do op-eds. So, and then they'll do letters to the editor. They also do just other media publications on whether it's the hearings that we do or the state report cards we release and all of this kind of stuff. And I just think that's great. To me, it's like what we would always do at USF on, talking about ourselves, whether through social media or blogs or whatever. But this is, a comprehensive team that's able to do that. And that's just kind of their concerted job, which I just am like, that's what you need, Dr. Trotz, is a whole media and PR team. But I digress. So anyway, so that's who I am and what I do. And I think that after reading the articles that Dr. Trotz posted and or listening or watching the videos or whatnot, I'm hoping that y'all are beginning to see the ways that she's put things together to highlight the interactions and the interconnections between policy, engineering design, community and stakeholder engagement and outreach, and that those are the things that I'm able to do in the job that I'm doing now. So to me, that's exciting. It's for policy. Some of the things that I think it's important that I've learned and that are like new and different that I'm just kind of teeing all this up as a discussion point. But water quality regulations, local and federal and state matches for specific types of grants. So for access to money, if the federal government puts up 80%, then local municipalities have to put up at least 20% for some large grant portions. And then land use policies, those are things that were certainly covered in some of the publications that y'all are reading. And I know things that we talked about whenever Dr. Trott's recent graduate, Dr. Carrasquillo, discussed in redlining in Tampa. So whenever the interstates and things like that were built. So policy is kind of an area of interconnected factors that I certainly work in and dabble. Engineering design. So as engineers, when we're developing a design, we're considering environmental impacts. Certainly for Envision, we're considering social responsibility, and that even bucket of thought is deep and wide. And then also the economic feasibility, like Dr. Schatz mentioned, for these sensors and things like that. Most of the time technology is out there that exists to answer the questions that we have. It's a matter of like, who's going to be able to pay for it? Is it feasible for us to use it on a long-term basis? Can we use something or implement something to kind of fix a problem immediately, or is this something that we can kind of implement as a strategy on the long term? And then finally, for so policy, engineering design, and then community engagement, that's whether it was the part of my dissertation work that was in Belize, or it was in the Florida Keys, or it's the work that I'm doing now with engineers around the country, like understanding and just being around the folks that you're working with, and whether it's understanding the context of the infrastructure need, or the historical, we've already mentioned it this afternoon, like some of the historical perspectives of the place. These are all really important to till up and to have as a part of the conversation, and then to bring these people, to bring communities together in with policymakers, engineers, elected officials, so that we're not, like Amanda mentioned, we're not putting things in and then taking it back up and putting it back in and taking it back up, or certainly that we're not doing something that's detrimental to a community or any household.
So Christy, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because someone talked about, when I think of infrastructure, it's always sort of aligned with elected leadership or politics. And so lots of big infrastructure comes when, an election is coming up. And so is that, like, how does that manifest across some of the states that you see here? Because I think it probably is similar in the U.S. I think Sheldon raised this for Belize, and so, yeah.
Yes, and I even remember that when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Uganda, there was a presidential election at the time, and during the election, like the pre-election period, the politicians would come around just like they do in many of the states that I've lived in, and they would promise better roads or something like that. Hold on, is it really loud in the background?
Yeah, I'm trying. Is it you?
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yes, so I think I'm not going to like talk too much about politics, but I will say that elected officials do tend to kind of sit up and take notice of like opportunities for ribbon cuttings, whether that's, you know, a new bridge or a stretch of road that's been repaved or something like that. But like we mentioned before, the really non-sexy topics like asset management, if you're just expanding a wastewater treatment plant because you have capacity issues and there's no like ground being broken and everybody gets to wear the hard hat and pose with the shovel, that's a lot. Those things are a lot more difficult to get through the process and get through the red tape. And that's where I actually see really savvy engineers who can sell in a compelling way these needs and also pitch it, whether it's with a media team or if it's just a team of engineers, pitch it to elected officials so that those projects get addressed. Yeah, that's a real thing for sure. That's at the federal level, that's at various state levels. And it changes. I think that kind of willingness to adapt and not necessarily ribbon cut because you're concerned about re-election, that's different based on who's in office and who isn't. In person, not party necessarily. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I won't go on a long soapbox, but I'm gonna start talking about systems thinking. And once I go, I really get going. Okay, so like I said, when Dr. Trotz, after I looked at some of the things that she had y'all read, I know the job that I'm doing now, and I hope I explained that to y'all well. But then whenever I saw that she put the United Nations piece, the Sustainable Development Goals, UN Sustainable Development Goals piece, that Dr. Zhang, Zimmerman, Mahelsik, and I worked on a couple years ago, I really realized that it was important to talk about the interactions between various things, whether it's policy or engineering design or community engagement and public perceptions. It's the interactions between those things and really looking at the work that we do regarding infrastructure through a systems perspective. So a big bird's eye view of all the interacting factors so that we can, when we do that, we can leverage the synergies and interactions that are really productive and helpful, and we can reduce those that are, and I looked this word up earlier and I'm not going to be embarrassed, deleterious. So we can minimize things that have a negative effect, basically. And so that's really helpful. And I would say, like, while I might not be doing necessarily the quantitative models that I did with my dissertation, just being able to have that systems thinking lens, it's kind of the glasses that I look through when I do anything, has been really valuable, especially here as we're integrating resilience more intentionally throughout all of our literature. So we're encouraging every infrastructure sector at every state and in the national report card to consider how their infrastructure is resilient. And that is something I'm really proud of. And we do that by not only like educating the engineers and training on, so what do we mean by resilience when we talk about levees or dams or the energy sector or even airports and rail. But we really say, okay, so that's what we mean by resilience. And so how is your state doing? What are they doing? And one example I can give is recently that contextualizes kind of systems thinking and resilience and things like that, at least in Mississippi, is I was talking with a colleague about the port in Mississippi, and they were saying that really they had some federal money to spend, but that to make the port more resilient and kind of useful given sea level rise and sea level rise projections and the increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events, their engineering expertise or engineering experts suggested that they build the port up. So basically, your equipment, all of your, and there's a lot of seafood and things like that in Mississippi, so a lot of your freezers and things like that, all of your electronics you would build up. And that would basically be tearing everything down and then bringing it up, a huge economic expense. And so instead, what they did is, and I thought this was really very creative, they couldn't afford that, didn't want to go out for loans, because that's the other thing I've learned a lot is like big loans take a long time to repay, and your constituents are the ones who are bearing the economic burden. So instead of building things up, what they did is actually made everything portable. So all of their electrical equipment and things like that are in these pods that if an extreme event were to come, they also have multimodal, so they have rail and roads going into the port. They can put things on carts and send them, maybe it's only 2 or 3 miles inland, or as far as they want, but they can send things in, all of this critical equipment, so that basically they just have a shell, and then that critical equipment after the storm has passed can go back, and then they can get things up and going as quickly as possible. So as y'all may know about resilience, it's not necessarily keeping functionality at 100% all the time. Maybe that is the goal, but instead if they can drop down and then quickly recover, that's a mark of resilience. So okay, I'm going to stop speaking and let y'all ask questions or not, and that's kind of where I wanted to leave things for today.
Thanks, Christy. So hopefully you all have some questions for Christy. I can call on you to ask the question, so don't be shy.
I would say you don't have to ask them, but
no need to raise your hand. Just jump in. So Sophia, go ahead.
Hey, Christy, thank you so much for presenting tonight. That was really interesting. My question is about what are some of the different ways that you engage the community when you were in Belize or in Florida working on some of these projects?
Well, I live there, so this is something I was saying to a colleague earlier. I think proximity matters a lot. I know we've all been forced to do virtual, but even this is a type of proximity. We're putting time on the calendar to get together and interact. But prior to interacting in a virtual sense, I was just really there. So I went to Belize the first time in 2014 with Dr. Trotz, and then subsequently went summers and holidays and things like that for the next handful of years. And so just got to know people by proximity, and certainly in like a methodological sense, my anthropology colleagues would say that I took a mixed methods approach. So we did surveys, interviews, focus groups that I learned from all of their just expertise and wisdom. And they taught me about that while I was teaching them about septic tanks and wastewater. So it was a very symbiotic relationship. So doing those things, doing interviews, focus groups, and surveys was a great way to get to know people when we were talking about something that wasn't just one another. I did get to introduce who I was, and I kind of knew who they were because I knew that they, we were going to talk about a wastewater system. But then when you had something else to talk about that wasn't just the two of you, it really kind of helped just natural friendships develop, because you laugh about poop or, yeah, mostly laughing about poop and stuff. Dr. Trott?
And so Sophia is in the Virgin Islands. She's at UVI.
Oh, great. We have y'all are from all over. Belize, UVI. I heard someone was from Bahamas earlier.
Yeah,
Great.
Nicholas is Bahamas.
And then someone's Bajan. You have a Bajan student?
Brian is Barbadian. Yeah.
Great. Well,
and then we have one student from India and one from Vietnam.
Oh, great. So yes, that's kind of a short answer for some of the ways for engagement. And then really informally, Sophia, I'm a people person. I'm probably not the best engineer. I will say it now with my degree in hand. Not the best engineer to do water quality testing, to the, microliter. Just not the best at that, but I feel like I am very good at interacting with folks and understanding kind of, or seeking to understand their perspective, and then trying to bridge that, community perspective and that real place-based expertise with talking with folks in the national government or in local agencies and water quality groups, and just kind of saying like, okay, how are these things either linking or not linking, and then are there any ways to help bridge the gaps, and to do so in a way that's like sustainable, so that obviously I'm not there, so that when I'm not there, communications are actually made a little bit better. Yeah, and do all of that imperfectly.
Can I ask a question on the systems thinking?
Mm-hmm.
How have you brought that into your work at ASCE?
That's a really good point. So I am like internal lobbying within our association that one of the major findings that we push in the 2021 report card is that resilience is actually seeing systems of systems. That what we're finding is that, rail and ports and roads, these things, even what Amanda mentioned, things are often very closely linked together. And so if we want to make one stronger, it's most beneficial when we make them all stronger. And it's also most beneficial and efficient when we do that together. So I would say that's one of the ways, like just a low-hanging fruit. And I do like side hustle systems work. I'm working with colleagues on publications, more quantitative stuff now, and other things.
Okay, thanks. Mm-hmm. Who has another question?
Hi, I have a question. I wondered, with your work in Belize, what did you find most frustrating? I mean, you said you had this great rapport with individuals, but do you see, from 2014 to now, do you see, has there any been change, or maybe even if it's just change in mentality of how people approach your research or your work?
Yes. So that's a great question. I would say the most frustrating thing to me is that
you could be honest.
You what?
I said you can be very honest.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I will be. I can't lie. Dr. Schatz, that's probably half the reason why she asked me on here, because she knew that I wouldn't be able to. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I would say the most frustrating thing is like not how little of a change agent I am, but like how slowly things go. And this is not just in Belize. This is in the United States federal government. This is in the local, state governments or county commissioners or with county commissions. But it's, to me, that slowness is, it's kind of a product of one misstep sort of early on that had it been done maybe with someone who had some Envision training or sort of had a longer range sort of perspective, it might have been done a little bit better, because it's easy to be, like we say, an armchair quarterback. So that's basically someone who is, a Monday morning quarterback talking about the game that they watched on Saturday or Sunday. It's easy to do everything in hindsight, but these engineers that were planning, particularly in the south part of the country, in Placencia, the contracted engineers, I think, when we were working with them, or when we went and interviewed them, didn't know about resource recovery systems. Whenever they thought about it, was really all dollars and cents, and some of the projects that we thought really maybe could be beneficial or useful were not the ones that were, they didn't really sell them very well in the local community. Okay, so not to put all of the burden on an engineer who might not know all of the most up-to-date technology, not to put all of the pressure there, but it is difficult for us too. And I would say I take a lot of responsibility for understanding the place as a researcher to come in and fit between a community that lives there, as you know, is from there, lives there, will be there even after, I come back and take another job. It's challenging to be between a community and a water agency or the federal government, and to kind of make these conversations happen, or to kind of help facilitate those conversations. That's a tough place. But I think actually Dr. Trotz is sort of long-term, she is a long-term researcher there. And so she brings students and kind of helps to link people with expertise. I think that's a really fruitful thing, that even though it might be frustrating for me as an individual researcher, to see little change, she's one of the ones who continues to help address challenges and kind of stay in the fight.
Yeah, I would add, Charlene, that if we were not in COVID times and able to go to community meetings and that sort of stuff, we would probably be going to projects in Tampa where engineers have done the same thing, where they've sort of designed this project and then brought it to community kind of after the fact. And so we're always coming, and we did do that for years. So it's always plugging in later there, but now it's sort of like the engineering field itself, our field of civil engineering, with Envision and sort of other things that they're doing, is sort of saying, well, we need to step back and do this a little better. And so one thing that we've been looking to do more in the region, and we've done in Barbados with the water utility there, is to sort of do the Envision training. So you start to, even your engineers start to think differently. And so many have been trained in the systems that we've gone through, or ones at the University of the West Indies, or in England. UB does have a civil program. And so it's changing the way we're trained, is what we're really looking at. And so it's for, students like you guys in this class to start being advocates for a better way to look at infrastructure. And some of it, happens, but not all the time. And then what you're seeing also is that funding agencies are also sort of evaluating this, right? So they're saying that, well, did you do this? And so they might say, did you do stakeholder consultations? And you're like, yeah, I had a meeting and here are the people I met. But now it's to come back and say, well, how do you value those stakeholder consultations, right? So was the community or stakeholder really engaged from the beginning, and all those sorts of things? And so I think it's more learning how to give people a voice, and have that voice be meaningful when something is being evaluated. Chrisanne has her hand up.
Sorry, Chrisanne, right before, tagging along on that, it's like I put on my notes too. It's like it's our responsibility as engineers and scientists to also be like wise and smart about how these great suggestions from community partners or from agencies in the areas that we're working with, how to integrate their suggestions into solutions. So is it a policy that we develop? Is it an actual technical engineering design change? We don't put the spout down here because, you know, many older women come to get water. We put it up here because, you know, they're whatever, they can't bend over. So is it a design change? Is it a educational campaign? Is it public opinion? Those are the sort of things that it's like, we now have new responsibilities too. We have this new lens to look through and then new responsibilities as well.
Yeah, I mean, okay, those are great. I mean, because I've been to a couple public consultations, and I feel that, especially here in Belize, is that the Department of Environment will post that they have a environmental impact assessment, and we're having a public consultation, but the document is so technical that the community, it goes totally over their heads. And so, do you really consult, or you're just going through the motions because, well, you have to? That's why I wondered about it.
It happens all over. Use a thing like a scorecard or some basic, yes, no rubric, even green and red. Like, I just think communicating to people kind of where they are is, I don't know, makes me feel good.
And sometimes the document is thousands of pages also. And so what I've seen is, like when some of these things come through, it's sort of like we need to have groups that could sort of parse it up, break it down, and then say what it means, because it's true. They will take a picture to show that they had a community meeting. They'll take a picture from the newspaper to show that it was announced in a newspaper to have a meeting and that so many people showed up. And we have to question also whether that same thing happens in Envision, right? How do they prove that these criteria are being met with stakeholder engagement? Because it might be the same thing. And so that's something to keep in mind. Amanda, you have a question? Sophia, I think your hand is still up. And I know Chris-Anne had a question too.
I was just gonna follow up with, that was kind of brought up in the NPR piece, where the host, I think, brought up whether what they were talking about was an issue of racism or an issue of going into poor neighborhoods and engaging with people who won't necessarily fight back, type of thing. And they just kind of go over their heads, like they explain what they feel like they need to explain at a level that they think is sufficient, and it doesn't ever actually reach the people who are impacted. Right?
Yeah, and I think we can consider even in our like engineering ethics, whether that's ethical. Not to go straight for the jugular, but
yeah, very true.
I was looking recently at this website, because I'm trying to put together a center that talks about like looking at like how do you do inclusive infrastructure and focusing on urban Black communities. And the Brookings Institute, I found this sort of like Center for Transformative Placemaking, which is also talking about a different way in which we think about development, especially in some of our urban cores, and the way in which you engage and have sort of collective agreement on what happens there. So I'll share the link so that I think it would be good for us to sort of hear from people who are doing things in a little different way. I think I shared it with Daniel because in his reflection, he sort of talked about the community he was from is from in California. and sort of, you know, it's a community that is experiencing gentrification, and sort of like, you know, there's good and bad to it, but like sort of I think we should think about how do we you know, from places where we're from, how do we engage there, you know? And so and it's something I'm struggling with because I've been in Tampa for 15 years and work a lot in East Tampa, where Adam went to school at Middleton. And it's now a community that's undergoing like lots of gentrification, I think. And one thing I used to argue before, I was like, you know, we're going to be better than the San Francisco Bay Area because, you know, they gentrified and like all Black and brown people just kind of disappeared, right? And then it's sort of happening here, and it's sort of how do you intervene in a way that you don't lose everyone? And so I think if we could get examples from places that are where communities are really banding together to address this, some are like establishing land trusts so that they can purchase, you know, so many own the land, like in East Tampa, but property taxes have gone up, and, you know, hard to maintain. People don't have jobs and stuff like that, so they're getting higher prices for their property, but also not being able to afford to stay there. And so looking at sort of how is there another model for that? So, and then of course, you know, after everyone is gone is when they're going to say, oh, we'll take the highway down and we're going to bring in because the train line runs through there. And so we're going to convert it, and it's going to be, you know, transit for people and a bike path and all this sort of stuff, right? Which is what they've been asking for the longest while. So, so I just wanted to put that out there. It'd be good to hear from examples, and you guys keep me in check so that we don't always sort of have to read about bad or horrible horrible stuff, but we see some of the good stories, and we hear from some of the people that are doing some of these changes and motivational. Christy, when you talk about your different states that you're working with, like, could you give us an example of, like, if we wanted someone who was being really progressive with stormwater, where would we go? Or if we wanted someone really progressive with, you know, with transit, who would you recommend? Like, what is Florida good for? You know, like, what are we?
I'm working on the Florida report card, so stay tuned. I'll get back in touch with y'all before the end of the year, but they're hoping to release November or December. So I'm not going to speak on that, but I can look back at their old stuff. I would say some like pretty classic trends from East Coast to West Coast are older infrastructure lends itself then to newer infrastructure. So East Coast, your roads and bridges tend to be historic, really, and so they're more expensive and they're challenging to kind of maintain. And then they were usually initially made with older materials, and especially ones in kind of more of the New England area, between the harsh weather and the salt that goes on the surfaces, and then also being coastal areas. So that's a real challenge. East Coast, your roads and bridges generally tend to be a lot more like newer, more up-to-date materials. They're actually putting in little pockets of innovations, and they're trying like pilot studies and things like that for like material science stuff that would come out of engineering and material science. So that's kind of interesting. As far as energy goes, I worked with Rhode Island recently, and they're really super, like, they're trying to be really concerted. The governor there is trying to go, I can't remember if it's all or mostly renewable by like 2030. And so they have a huge push to make wind economically feasible. So that's, I mean, I also think that that's really interesting. It's a smaller, kind of more bite-sized area. No offense if anybody comes from Rhode Island, but that makes some of the economics a little bit easier. For stormwater, Maryland, we talked about the Chesapeake Bay. Maryland actually is really savvy in some of their stormwater work because they take this kind of, I know WEF, the Water Environment Federation, pushes this idea of one water, but they take this watershed-based approach. So they're considering drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, kind of all bundled together, the quality and the implications. They look at a lot of agriculture runoff and things like that. It's not just a localized, my county's, stormwater impact, but it's like watershed wide, which is great. And that just draws the importance of communication between counties and across agencies.
I'm sorry, I had a problem with my audio. What did you say for Florida?
I said Florida's report card's coming out before the end of the year, hopefully.
Okay, so we don't really have like we're the best at something.
I can't answer that question just yet. I hope you are. I have a special place in my heart for Florida, so I certainly hope that that's the way that they've been assessed, that the state's been assessed, but I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
I would actually say, do you know Florida, there are some areas where when the energy grid was reconstructed, that it was done stronger, and so now that's one of the kind of characteristic places where they point to it being more resilient. They like strengthened the grid or made the grid harder or whatever.
For hurricanes or something?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other questions? Chris-Anne, you had a question? Amanda, go ahead.
Did Chris-Anne want to go first? I feel like she's been waiting.
No, so my question was actually answered. Hi, Christy.
Hey, Christian.
So my question was really when it came to more of the social and qualitative indicators when it comes to infrastructure, because in the report card, as I was going through it, I noticed that there was a lot of like different social factors that were there. And so I was just curious when it comes down to when this gets translated and used by policymakers, how much, I guess, weight or like importance do they actually put on that? Because one of them was talking about like the hazardous waste and how we know environmental justice issues are huge when it comes to the US, or even as simple as like schools, with how like 24% of schools in the nation are like poor or underfunded. So are policymakers looking at that aspect of it, or is it more of the economic, well, can we afford to do it or not afford to do it, even though societal issues do eventually turn into an economic issue?
Yeah, that systems thinking. Well done, Chris-Anne. You passed the test.
Trying to remember it. See, thanks, Christy.
It's good. It's so good. So yes, I think that's a good point. And I'm glad you saw some stuff that like piqued your interest as far as being social indicators. They are important. They are important, I would say, and I'm not like a professional by any means as far as like, like a whisperer to policymakers or to elected officials. But from my experience, they're just people like any of us, any of you, are like, could be a wonderful policymaker probably. And so they want to do right by their communities, but so often they are limited, like resource limited. And so that's why frequently needs and things get translated to dollars. Is that the best way to translate it? No. That's why storytelling, to me, if you have a need and that's like, here's my dollar sign, then I'm not going to say that until I tell you, like, I contextualize that with this person or this story about why this dollar sign matters. So that kind of dynamic is actually the most common and not just like, oh, let me play on emotions, but like, no, let me really tell you this story And then let me tell you the gravitas, the economic gravitas or impact of not kind of taking care of this person and this. And so a lot of times infrastructure is big dollars, but it is contextualized to people. That's why when we think of schools, when we think of bridges, we talk about people getting to their kids' basketball games and are they going to, if a bridge is down, are they going to have to go around and miss it? Like we try to really make it very, like if you were talking to your neighbor at the mailbox, something that people can relate to. The other thing I would say besides that, EJ, environmental justice with hazardous waste. We actually, this coming year, for the 2021 report card, keep your eyes open because because one of the gentlemen I know brought that up, like front and center, cast, these big lights on it, spotlights, whenever we've been developing that chapter. And so I'm hopeful that that'll really shine brightly and be new in ways that it hasn't been before.
So thank you, Christy. Yeah, that makes sense because that's what I was wondering, kind of how are they being tied together at more of like the higher level?
Yeah, and that's why Dr. Trotz has like beat this drum for years now, but like having all of us, whether we're a scientist or an engineer, from whatever background, wherever we come from, whoever we are, to be able to tell stories. And to tell them in a compelling way, to put faces to engineering. I think that's really, and science, I think that's really very important. Certainly faces to infrastructure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, you had your hand up?
Yeah, kind of piggybacks on that, but so you mentioned that engineers should use the report card as like an educational resource or tool to bring light to the issues that we have locally or nationally or whatever. But is there also a more structured system in place for how to act on the recommendations included in the report card?
When you say structured, are you talking about like a letter to your member of Congress, like a button to push?
Yeah, I mean, that could be. I was just speaking generally because I didn't know if there was even something like that in place where the report card comes out. Okay, so now what?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that always happens after, or is it just kind of this tool that or resource that we have? Yeah,
I gotcha.
Or how do communities learn about it and engage with it?
Totally.
Right.
So a couple of ways. I mean, I'll go from like grassroots, like, telling my next door neighbor about it, all the way up to the last, 3 presidents or so have like had the report card and talked about it, on the floor during a session of Congress. And so if I'm any one of y'all in this class and you see the report card in 2021 and it's been released, I would encourage you, if you're so inclined, to talk about infrastructure in like your adjacent circles and things that make sense in areas. Like I said, if you're working with your kids' Boy Scout group or Girl Scout group, or even if you can go as a person in STEM and talk to a local class, I think that's a great way to just sensitize folks about like, what is infrastructure, where is it, the roads, who funds the roads, like, why does it matter? And you can do that kind of at a national level, and then that's where the kind of that link between the state report cards and the national report cards is so helpful. You can talk about national trends and then link it back down to like your individual state. So that's one way. And then like, I love talking about it, even in, this is going to sound super nerdy, but whatever, even in more like social settings, because I just think, and I didn't know that how much funding there is in infrastructure, who, like I said, when I first started this discussion, that city councils, that the, you know, people who is really responsible for these decisions. At one point, someone who is, like I said, just like any of us, a normal tax-paying citizen, was responsible for some of those redlining policies. Somebody sat on committees and allowed that to happen. And so why can't we be informed about infrastructure and sit on those same committees and do right by our community members? So that's kind of grassroots, local sort of perspectives. And then as a member of ASCE, and then otherwise, like we train our members to do media interviews. So if you're an expert in dams or bridges or whatever, we'll have folks do. So recently we just had Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times. They'll all talk with our public relations and media team, and those folks will reach out to our members to interview on things like that. So that's another way to talk about the report card, is like through national or local media channels. And then we also encourage members to speak to their representatives. So whether that's, I never knew how to like know what's going on in state government regarding infrastructure, but it's a lot. And you don't have to know everything. There are actually plenty of ways to just like get the sound bites and then to be engaged in those, to, like I said, press the button and let your state representative know that you know what is about to come down the pipeline regarding the CARES Act or a COVID, bill 2.0, and you think that it should involve infrastructure, like an equitable access to good infrastructure. Those are easy ways to kind of get involved. Or something as simple as tweeting. Do what?
Are you recommending that we look into that as a class?
Well, I think you should. But I mean, like, and I would say in like a time of COVID, some of it too is like telling success stories of like, Amanda, when and if that pavement and their asset management debacle ever gets fixed, take a picture, send it to @City of Tampa or whomever it was at Hillsborough County and say, hey, thanks for getting this fixed. And like a sincere tweet or a Facebook post or things like that, because that also like gets some traction. Y'all are the public, we are the public, and those sorts of things actually are really taken into consideration. So Dr. Trotz has been tweeted at by our state representative and things like that. Like, I mean, those things really matter. You're someone's constituent and they care. They actually are trying to serve you. And I think you can influence them to do that well.
I would emphasize too that, I think one part of it is sort of like, as we read the infrastructure report card and are shocked at how terrible the grade is, it is this disconnect between our infrastructure and our lives, right? And so even as engineers, we sort of don't know everything. We don't know the process. We don't know the state of it. And in many cases, and it's being able to have these conversations around the things that we pay for and the things that we use every day. Mm-hmm. So I do think we need to figure out how to have more conversations like that. And I also feel that it's because the public is not really aware or a part of these conversations is the reason why we have not gotten the trillions of dollars to do the upgrades that are needed, right? Because there's no big public pressure.
Well, and two, like we opened the conversation with like a song about a place, and that place was getting ready to be impacted by a wastewater treatment plant. Like, to creatively express about infrastructure, I'm a big proponent of. I'm like an art appreciator. I'm not necessarily an art creator, but there are people who are, and I am like, more power, amplify that. And just think like, let's pull out all the stops and do it in a million different ways, whether it's me talking to my neighbors about infrastructure or the local Girl Scout group, and it's Chris Ann writing a poem or Daniel like singing a song about it. Like, everybody like plug in your ways. That's because, I think that's really helpful.
Thanks, Christy. Well, we're kind of figuring out what our class project is gonna look like. So I think this was plant some ideas for us to think about. One thing I did want to go back to, Chrisanne brought it up, Amanda brought it up, I think, and I know some of the reflections brought it up, this idea of, is there an infrastructure scorecard, but that looks at social infrastructures? And why is there not one? And if there was going to be one, like, how do we put it together?
So when you say social infrastructure, what do you mean?
Whose reflection had it?
Mine did.
Who's that? Amanda?
Amanda, yeah.
Could you describe what you were talking about?
Yeah, so I reflected on Cohen was her last name, right? Deb Cohen.
Yeah.
Her piece, and she spoke a lot about like police infrastructure and the prison infrastructure and stuff like that. Those kind of social infrastructures and just social dynamics that have, been in this country for centuries, and how they've evolved and people think that things are getting better, but it's just got a different face on it.
Yeah, I also wrote about that, and I also included like healthcare. I think would be interesting to look at the social components of healthcare, how good our hospital systems are, and pharmacies and all of that.
I think that's great. Y'all are brilliant geniuses, and I love social factors and the ways that they interact, and like the masks that they have and that they haven't had in, the ways that they are painted to look, like Amanda said, kind of better than what they really are. I think that's important. So one, great. Two, while we don't have it, I would say maybe a simple kind of knee-jerk, and this is going to be shallow but not superficial. It's going to be shallow as far as the content. So the infrastructure that we've chosen is those that are maybe most federally funded, like and like as far as the infrastructure, the widget of the street, of the school building and things like that, broadly. So that doesn't mean that there aren't medical centers and prisons that are not federally funded. Those are, but they have a lot more patchwork sorts of privatized funding. They're probably also filled with social landmines that the American Society of Civil Engineers would not necessarily want to accommodate. But I can tell you the original intent of the portfolio of I think it was 10 infrastructure sectors that actually started. It started with the Reagan administration in like the 80s. Double check me on that, pretty sure. And so they wanted to know what's going on with this portfolio of federally funded infrastructure. And then 10 years afterwards, the American Society of Civil Engineers said, hey, and at this time it was President Clinton's administration. Hey, President Clinton, are y'all going to do a refresh of this federal study? They said no. We said, well, can we get it and do it? And they said, yeah, sure. And so from then on, it has been a subsequent 4-year, on a 4-year cycle of assessing. And so that's kind of the history of it. But from a logistics standpoint, I think adding things is going to be a real challenge, but not impossible. I would like to see if something like healthcare or prisons, or even the like social infrastructure within schools, if those things would be included, not just like the widget of like hard parts of schools. I think it would be great to see that kind of thing done with a real infusion of social scientists, a real interdisciplinary group of folks, not just engineers.
So that's a great place for me to show this diagram because I'm working on an engineering research center, which is looking at innovating inclusive infrastructures with or within urban Black communities, where you have to show these three planes of fundamental knowledge, enabling technologies, and then sort of integration of those technologies in some sort of engineered system. And the way we see it is that we're really dealing with built social and digital infrastructures, where the built are sort of these are the, food, energy, water, transportation, housing, and then social has more sort of health, education, disaster preparedness, and so on. But fundamentally looking at different disciplines and sort of understanding bias within those disciplines on infrastructure, and then figuring out how to create more inclusive infrastructural technologies. And the social we're thinking are more like in terms of systems thinking to bring in there. So I'll keep you guys updated on this and probably try to discuss more in one of the classes in terms of how we're thinking of bringing the civil together with social and with computing. Because when we think of things like redlining and how it may have occurred years ago, what we're finding out from the AI people in the computing side is that it's happening like in the computer, like it's already screening you out on social media, right? Based on the ads it's sending you, determined by sort of your race or where you live. So it's just very interesting to see like this older engineering discipline and then this really new one, how things are manifesting in different ways, while the older engineering discipline is saying, we need to fix what we did, and the new one sort of like, well, we're entered this and we actually don't even know what we realize we have equitable AI to deal with, or responsive AI to deal with. So, and then the social piece is a critical component there. So we're trying to figure that out. So I'll talk a little more about that because we're having discussions on how to address these, or how to bring some of these things together, and the relevance of engineering to that, and the importance of, working with multiple disciplines from the social sciences on that. So it's 7:37, and so I want to thank Christy very much for joining us today and talking to us about the scorecard. We'll look out for the Florida scorecard and think of, you're a phone call away, and so as we progress in the class, we will probably have more questions or more interest in sort of what the project it is that we work on. So, but thanks for actually weaving together the different readings that I put out there.
Welcome. And I didn't even talk about Envision that much, but y'all will dive deeper into what that is.
Yeah, next week we actually have the education director from Envision joining us. And so I imagine that she'll sort of, give that sort of overview and kind of pep talk and that sort of stuff. So thanks so much. Guys, I'm going to put a link.
You're very welcome. I'm going to go then.
Bye, Christy.
Bye, y'all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
Bye, Christy.
I'm going to put a link in here for your post reflection. It's just a form, and you just type in whatever you want to type in based on the readings again and today's discussion. Doesn't have to be much. It could be 1 sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, a paragraph. But this is the 1 point post reflection, and you could do it now or do it later. If somebody just clicks on it, just let me know that you can access the form, and it's not like
it works.
It works. Okay.
Yeah, just click on it.
Okay. Great. And I had another one of those polls. Hold on. Let me presentation feedback. So if you want to go back to the, oh, this didn't work. To complete the survey. I added something else on the polls, like a presentation feedback thing. Oh, I see some are taking.
It's
Okay.
4 questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could you resend a link to that poll because I closed it to clear space.
Oh,
And
okay.
now I
Hold on.
can't find the link.
Let me in the chat.
There it is. Thank you.
pollev.com/MayaTrots432. See it? Adam, you get it?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, is that Jair? Jair, you had a question? Okay.
Sorry, I accidentally clicked on it.
No problem. So for next week, what do we have for next week? Let me see. Where's our website? Oops. So I tried to put stuff on a website, and it's just the syllabus that I transferred, really and truly. So just so that everyone has access. September 9th. So we start at 5 next week because Lindsay's going to come on at 5. And let's see what we have. So by next week, if you could go on the ISI website and just sign up on there. And then they have the Envision manual version 3, which you'll download. I had it also linked on Teams. And so, Sophia, I can email it to you, but you can directly download it from the ISI website. But they have that and some other materials associated with the version 3 manual. This is a short, like 5-pager on why they think the Envision addresses systemic racism. And then these two are sort of a blog sort of like on the history of where this class came from and sort of some write-ups from the original class, which included Christy. And this is just another blog. I thought I'd move this. This one by Hendricks, I'm actually going to move to later on under the climate and disaster. So so don't read that one. But next week we'll sort of have, I think, the introduction to Envision, and I'll see how much Lindsay is going to cover, because if she doesn't sort of describe the Envision process, then after her talk, I'll just spend a little time talking about, how the thing is structured, so that the next week we could just go into sort of the different, starting on quality of life criteria. Any questions?
No, I don't have
11
any.
surveys done. So
I have a
I'll
question.
try and summarize and share with you guys. And I'm only saying that because I'm not sure how to look at some of the work. Well, let me just share. I don't want to, we have a minute left. So average, good, excellent. But I can't seem to, how would you rate the presenter? So I'll try and figure out how to download it so that we all sort of have a copy so we could see how people thought the presentation was and so on. Any questions? It's 7:45, so I don't want to keep you guys any longer.
I have a question.
Somebody has a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.